The word burden came out of his mouth like poison and it didn't even sting him. It stung me. I had just made tea. My fingers trembled from arthritis, but I still managed to carry the tray of porcelain cups and lemon slices to the dining table, where David and Elise sat with their arms crossed, eyes darting between each other like I was some complicated problem to be solved. "It's just not sustainable anymore, Mom," David said, voice calm like a doctor explaining a terminal diagnosis. "You're getting forgetful, and we've got the kids, the mortgage, and Elise's parents to look after. We need to think long-term." Then Elise, her voice clipped and precise like every sentence had already been rehearsed. "We can't keep coming over every time you lose your phone or forget to pay a bill. You need help. A facility. Somewhere with staff." I nodded slowly, as if I understood, though the words crashed in my ears like metal. And then David said it. "You're becoming a burden, Mom." A burden. I sat still for several seconds. The tea tray vibrated slightly on the glass table. My lips curled as if to smile, but it didn't reach my eyes. I looked at my son, the boy I raised alone after his father died in '92, the man I worked 2 jobs to put through college, the father who now lectured me on sustainability in the house I built from the ground up. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I didn't remind him whose name was on the deed. Instead, I began to plan. When the idea came to me, I was standing in the hallway, staring at the framed family photo taken 10 years ago during Thanksgiving. David had a bit more hair then. Elise smiled like she meant it. The twins were only toddlers, chubby-faced and wide-eyed. And I still had color in my hair. It was my house. Mine. Paid in full after 35 years of waiting tables, raising David, and denying myself every small luxury to build a home I could finally retire in. I had built every corner of it with dreams. And yet, somehow, they had come to believe it belonged to them. So I picked up the phone. The real estate agent, Marcia, was in her 50s, wore bright red lipstick, and had the no-nonsense tone of a woman who had seen it all. I told her I wanted to sell quickly, quietly, and in cash. "Any particular reason?" she asked, eyeing me over her glasses. "Just time for a change," I replied. I told no one, not my sister Margaret in Oregon, not the neighbors who still brought me plums in the summer, not even my bridge partner, Eleanor, who always sensed when something was wrong. The inspection came and went. Offers rolled in within a week. I chose the one that asked no questions and offered full cash. David and Elise never noticed the for sale sign. I'd asked Marcia to keep it off the lawn. 2 weeks later, I called them over for Sunday brunch. They arrived late, as always. Elise was on her phone. David gave me a quick peck on the cheek. The twins were dropped off at soccer, apparently. The table was already set. I made my lemon scones David's favorite and a spinach quiche, just like the one from the bistro I used to take him to after school when we still talked about dreams and dinosaurs. "I've decided to make a change," I said, slicing the quiche neatly. David glanced up. "You mean the home we were just talking about?" "No, not that." I poured coffee into their mugs, smiling calmly. "I sold the house." They both froze. Elise lowered her phone. David blinked. "What?" "I sold it. The money is already in escrow. I closed this Friday." David's face turned white. Elise leaned forward, mouth slightly agape. You sold the house. Without telling us." "I didn't realize I needed your permission," I replied, voice smooth as the clink of silver on porcelain. "After all, I'm just a burden." David's jaw tightened. "That's not what but it is what you said. You and Elise came here 2 weeks ago and decided I was a problem to be handled. And now, I'm solving it." "But where will you go?" Elise asked, her voice higher now, strained. I smiled. "Not to a facility, if that's what you're worried about." I pushed a folder across the table toward them. Inside, flight information, rental agreements, and a letter from a travel agency. "I'm traveling. Paris first, then Tuscany. Maybe spend spring in Kyoto." They stared at the folder like it was a bomb. Mom, you're 80. 76, I corrected. "And my hips are just fine, thank you. Besides, I've spent the last 4 decades living for others. I think it's time I find out what it means to live for myself." Elise tried to recover. "But what about the kids? Don't you want to see them grow up?" I stood slowly, picking up the empty plates and taking them to the sink. "I wanted to raise them, Elise. But that opportunity passed. I'm done waiting to be needed." David stood now too, pacing. "Mom, you don't have to do this. Look, I didn't mean what I said." Yes, you did. And that's okay, because it taught me something. I don't want to spend the rest of my life waiting for scraps of attention from people who pity me. That evening, after they left in stunned silence, I sat in my bedroom and watched the sunset turn the sky into melted gold. The old oak tree outside rustled gently, its branches brushing the glass like a goodbye. I thought about the memories, David's first steps in the hallway, the creak of the stairs during teenage tantrums, the nights I fell asleep on the couch waiting for him to come home. And now, the house would belong to someone new. A young couple, maybe, or a writer with cats. Whoever it was, they wouldn't know the quiet strength in these walls. But I would carry it with me. The next morning, I packed only what mattered. 2 suitcases, 1 small carry-on, a photo of me and David on his graduation day, and a tiny ceramic giraffe he made in 1st grade. The rest? I left it behind. I wasn't running away. I was reclaiming my life. I arrived in Paris on a Wednesday morning, the kind that drapes the city in a soft gray hush, like the world is still whispering itself awake. The plane ride had been long, and my knees were stiff, but as soon as I stepped out of Charles de Gaulle, something in me opened. Maybe it was the smell of strong coffee drifting from the airport cafe. Maybe it was the young man offering taxis who smiled at me like I was a person, not an obligation. I checked into a tiny hotel in Montmartre with creaky wooden floors and curtains that smelled like lavender. The room was barely bigger than my old laundry room, but the window opened wide to a view of tiled rooftops and pigeons dancing along the ledges. For the first 2 days, I didn't do much. I walked. I let the streets lead me wherever they wanted. I sipped espresso on sidewalks, watched children chase each other in parks, and let my phone ring without answering. David called. Twice. Then texted, "Are you really in France?" Followed by, "Can we talk?" I didn't reply. On my 3rd day, I met Simone. She was leaning against the railing at the Sacré-Cœur, sketching in a worn leather notebook. Her hair was wild and gray like mine, and her earrings were little silver birds that tinkled when she laughed. She asked if I was lost, and I told her no, just old and wandering. She smiled. "Then you are not lost. You are finally free." Simone had lived in Paris for 30 years. She was a retired philosophy teacher who now ran a small poetry club in the Latin Quarter and painted watercolors for tourists on Sundays. She invited me for wine and cheese that evening, and I accepted without hesitation, something the old me would have politely declined. We sat on her balcony overlooking a quiet street, and she told me about her husband who died 10 years ago, and how grief taught her that mourning is not just for the dead but for all the versions of ourselves we must let go. "You don't look like someone who gave up," she said, pouring me another glass. "I didn't," I replied. "I just finally stopped waiting to be saved." Over the next 2 weeks, Simone became my mirror. We visited bookshops and flea markets. She took me to the Rodin Museum and made me weep in front of the thinker. We danced to street musicians on Rue Malfatard and snuck pastries into the Jardin du Luxembourg like teenagers. And at night, I began writing again. I hadn't picked up a pen for myself in over 40 years, not since the days I used to scribble short stories on napkins during David's soccer practice. Now, the words poured out. Memories, thoughts, questions, regrets. I filled 2 whole journals in 12 days. It wasn't just travel. It was resurrection. Then, one morning, I received a letter. Not a text. Not an email. A real letter, folded paper, blue ink, and David's handwriting. It had been forwarded to the hotel from my old house's address. The concierge handed it to me with a wink, as if passing a secret. I hesitated before opening it. "Mom, I don't know how to say this, but I think you were right. Not just about the house but about everything. I was selfish. I was scared. And I think I said the word burden because deep down, I was afraid of becoming one myself. I'm sorry. The kids keep asking where you are. Elise doesn't know what to say to them. Honestly, neither do I. I just know that I miss you. If you want to talk, I'll listen this time. I promise. Love. David." I read it twice. Then 3 times. It didn't change the past. It didn't erase the sting of that word. But something in the way he wrote, "I miss you," felt like a crack in the armor he had spent years building around himself. Still, I didn't respond. Not yet. I left Paris a week later, taking the train to Florence. The Italian countryside looked like something from a dream I'd forgotten I once had. Golden fields, olive groves, and sleepy villages where time didn't seem to matter. In Florence, I rented a small apartment above a bakery. Every morning, the smell of warm bread drifted through the shutters and made me feel like I belonged somewhere, even if only for a little while. It was there I met Mateo, the bakery's owner, a man in his 60s with flour always on his sleeves and a voice that sounded like honey scraped over gravel. He taught me how to roll pasta with my hands and insisted I taste everything he made, even if it meant waddling home every night full and blissful. I told him once, over espresso, about my son. He nodded slowly. Children think we are made of stone, but we are clay. We remember everything. And I did remember. Not just the pain but the joy too. David's laugh when he was 5. The way he clung to my leg on the first day of school. The time he built me a snow fort in the backyard just because I said I missed winter as a girl. I hadn't lost those moments. I had just buried them beneath years of expectations. One afternoon, walking through the Boboli Gardens, I received another message from David. We're coming to Florence. The kids want to see you. If you'll have us. I stopped walking. For several minutes, I stood beneath a cypress tree, wind brushing my cheeks like breath. Part of me wanted to run. Part of me wanted to say no, to protect this new world I had built from the mess I left behind. But the larger part, the softer, braver part, wanted something else. Closure. I met them at the Piazza della Signoria. David looked older, more tired. Elise wore sunglasses and a fragile expression I didn't recognize. But the twins, now 12, ran to me like they always had, arms wide, eyes bright. Grandma, they shouted, and I held them both, their laughter pressing against my chest like glue holding broken pieces together. We sat at a small cafe, sipping lemon soda and nibbling biscotti. David watched me carefully. You look happy, he said quietly. I am, I replied, for the first time in a long while. Elise cleared her throat. We should have asked you what you wanted. I'm sorry we didn't. I'm not angry, I said. Just tired of being invisible. David looked away, jaw clenched. You weren't invisible, Mom. We were just busy. Caught up. And I was caught in a house that made me feel like I was waiting to die. Silence fell over the table. Then one of the twins, Lucy, reached for my hand. Can we come visit you here sometimes? I smiled. Only if you promise to try the gelato. She grinned. David nodded. We'd like that. If you'd have us. I took a deep breath. Yes. But this time, I set the terms. That night, I returned to my apartment alone. I didn't regret anything. Not the sale. Not the silence. Not the solitude. Because for the first time in my 76 years, I had learned the difference between being loved and being used. And I chose love, even if it started with loving myself. Kyoto in spring was exactly as I imagined it, except it was also lonelier than I had prepared for. After Florence, I thought I had mastered the art of solitude. I had said my piece, reconnected with David and the grandchildren, and believed, perhaps naively, that emotional closure would protect me from the ache of being alone again. But Kyoto had a silence that was heavier. The city bloomed in soft pinks and whites. Cherry blossoms fluttered down like feathers from the sky, and every corner of the old city seemed dipped in poetry. But I missed voices, Simone's laughter, Mateo's stories, even David's stubborn pride. I rented a modest room in a ryokan run by an elderly widow named Emmy, who had lived alone since her husband passed during the Kobe earthquake in '95. Her English was minimal, my Japanese non-existent, but somehow we communicated through nods, shared tea, and the kind of silence that didn't demand apology. In that silence, I found something else. Pain. It started with shortness of breath when climbing stairs. A week later, I fainted while walking along the philosopher's path. Locals helped me up and called an ambulance. I insisted it was dehydration. The hospital insisted on tests. They found a shadow on the lower lobe of my left lung. They didn't call it cancer. Not yet. They said suspicious mass and biopsy required and time-sensitive. I sat in the sterile white room, holding a paper cup of water, and for the first time in months, I wanted to go home, but I realized I no longer had one. The house I built was someone else's now. I had traded it for freedom, for self-worth. I didn't regret it, but I was suddenly tired. I spent the night in a hospital bed, staring at the ceiling fan. The nurse left the window open. I could hear rain on the bamboo leaves outside. That's when I opened the envelope I had been carrying since Florence, the second letter from Elise. She had handed it to me at the airport, said I didn't have to read it right away. It had sat in my travel bag like a ticking clock. Now, With the soft rain as background, I opened it. Dear Margaret, I owe you more than I can say. I've been trying to find the right words for weeks. Maybe it's easier in writing. You were right. About everything. About David. About me. I think I spent years trying to become the kind of woman who had control over her life, organized, responsible, efficient. But somewhere in the middle of motherhood and bills and work, I forgot how to see people. You became background noise. You stopped being a person to us. You were just grandma, or mom, or the person we call when the kids need a ride. I'm ashamed. Deeply. And I'm sorry. Not because you left, but because you had to. Whatever time you choose to give us moving forward, we'll treat it as a gift, not a duty. Love. Elise. I read the letter twice. Then I cried, not because of illness, not because of regret, but because finally, someone had seen me. Fully. No filters. No expectations. Just me. I didn't call David right away. Instead, I asked the hospital to schedule the biopsy, and I booked myself 2 more nights at the Ryokan. I walked Kyoto in the early mornings, letting the mist curl around me like a shawl. I sat by the Kamo River and watched children toss pebbles, remembering when David did the same. I thought about what I would do if the mass was malignant. Would I return to the States? Let David care for me? Would that be weakness? Would it be healing? On my final night before the biopsy, Emmy knocked softly on my door and handed me a bowl of akazukaris with hot tea poured over it, flavored with pickled plum and seaweed. She placed her hand over her heart and said the only English word I ever heard her say. Family. The biopsy results came back in 2 days. Benign. Not cancer. Just scar tissue, likely from pneumonia I barely remembered having in my 40s. I wept in the bathroom of the hospital. Not from fear anymore, but from the sheer release of tension I hadn't even known I was carrying. I walked out of the hospital with no destination. Just air in my lungs and tears on my face. Later that week, I sat in a tea house, finally ready to call David. I dialed. He picked up on the second ring. Mom. His voice cracked a little. I took a breath. I'm okay, I said. Silence. I mean health-wise. I had a scare. But I'm okay. You had a scare? He asked, panicked. I didn't tell you because I wasn't sure I wanted to be taken care of. But I think I'd like to come visit. Not to move in. Just to be close. For a little while. His voice broke. Please. Just come home. Whatever that means now. I flew back to the States in late May. But not to the city where the old house stood. I rented a small cottage near the Oregon coast, close to Margaret, my sister, who I had spent too long keeping at arm's length. She greeted me with a fierce hug and a loud, "Took you long enough, old woman." The house had a porch swing and a crooked fence. Inside, it smelled like cinnamon and pine. It wasn't mine, not yet, but it didn't need to be. I had learned that home wasn't always a building. Sometimes it was a choice. David and Elise drove up the coast with the kids the next weekend. They brought flowers and groceries and something else I hadn't expected, patience. David offered to cook dinner, and Elise asked permission before rearranging anything in the kitchen. The twins helped me plant herbs in the backyard and showed me their school art projects like I had never left. We sat on the porch swing as the sun went down. David beside me, not talking, just there. He finally said, I never knew you were this brave. I wasn't, I said. I just got tired of being afraid. That night after dinner, I sat on the back porch alone. The ocean murmured just beyond the trees. Margaret had gone to bed early, something about a new book she wanted to finish. The kids were camped out on the living room floor, whispering under blankets and giggling like secrets had never gone extinct. I held a cup of peppermint tea and let the steam warm my face. My hands, though stiff, no longer trembled. That's when David came out, carrying 2 mugs. I made chamomile, he said, holding one out. Thought maybe you'd want company. I nodded. Always. We sat there for a while in silence, both of us rocking gently, our bodies syncopated to the creak of the swing. He cleared his throat. I keep thinking about the day you told us you sold the house. I didn't respond right away. I was angry, he continued. Not because you sold it, but because you could. It forced me to see that I'd been treating you like furniture, something I expected to stay put, something I assumed would always be there. I sipped my tea, waiting. I still remember Dad's funeral. You didn't cry in front of me once. Just kept pouring juice and folding laundry and calling insurance people. I thought you didn't feel it. I felt it, I whispered. But I was afraid if I stopped moving, I'd fall apart. David nodded. You taught me strength. But I guess I used that lesson wrong. I started thinking you didn't need anything. That maybe you didn't even have needs. I had one, I said softly. I needed to be seen. David didn't reply, but he reached for my hand and held it for a long time. The next morning, Margaret and I took a walk along the coast. The wind tangled our hair, and gulls wheeled overhead like little gods laughing at gravity. Out of nowhere, she said, "Do you remember Daddy's cabin?" I blinked. "The one up near Cannon Beach?" She nodded. "I drove by it 2 months ago. It's falling apart. Roof sagging. Paint peeled off like old skin. But I still remembered that summer you were 16, and I was 12, and we stayed up every night trying to write our own horror novel." I laughed. "The one with the haunted stove?" She smiled. "Yes. We were going to publish it and become rich and famous and eat pancakes for every meal." We walked a few more minutes before she said, quieter this time, "I think you saved yourself when you left. But you also saved the rest of us by showing what was possible." "What do you mean?" "I mean people like us, women like us, were taught to disappear gracefully, to make room, to give up the front seat without being asked. You didn't disappear, Margie. You refused." The ocean roared softly beside us, like it agreed. Later that afternoon, I opened my journal and began writing a letter not to David, or Elise, or even the grandkids. This one was for me. I wrote about the girl I used to be, the one who dreamed of teaching history, the one who once ran barefoot through a cornfield at 17 because she believed freedom was something you could touch if you ran fast enough. I wrote to tell her she didn't vanish. She had only gone quiet. And now she was back. 2 weeks later, a package arrived. No return label, just my name. Inside was a heavy envelope and a set of keys. The letter was from Simone. She had found an apartment in Paris that overlooked the Seine. "Too many stairs for my knees," she wrote, "but perfect for someone with fire in her bones." She had purchased it outright and transferred the deed to my name. I stared at the paper, stunned. "Don't argue," the letter said. "You gave me laughter when I had only ghosts. Now let me give you a roof where your soul can stretch." I cried. Then I picked up the phone and booked a flight for the fall. Summer passed like honey. The grandkids visited every other weekend. David called just to chat. Elise and I cooked together, awkward at first, then easy. She told me stories about her mother. I told her stories about my own, and we discovered a quiet sisterhood neither of us had expected. One night in August, as I tucked Lucy into bed during a sleepover, she looked up at me and whispered, "You're brave, Grandma." I kissed her forehead. I learned it late, but I learned it. In September, I returned to Paris. Simone met me at the train station with flowers in one hand and a walking stick in the other. She had lost weight, and her laugh came slower, but her eyes still sparkled like someone who had secrets she didn't mind keeping. The apartment was small, with creaky windows and a balcony just wide enough for 2 chairs and a glass of wine. I filled it with secondhand books, fresh lavender, and the framed picture of David and me from his college graduation. Every afternoon, I wrote at the window. Not just letters or journal entries anymore, but real stories. Short fiction, memories laced with invention, little portraits of people I had once been. I sent one to a small American magazine on a whim. They published it. One chilly October morning, I woke before sunrise and brewed a pot of coffee. The sky was soft pink over the river. The bells from Notre Dame rang out like echoes from a former life. And I knew. It was time to make peace with the past entirely. I opened my laptop and drafted my will. I left money to the grandkids for their education. A small stipend for Elise and David. A portion for Margaret. But the largest gift was something else entirely. A scholarship fund in my name for older women returning to school. Women who had given their lives to others. Women who still had stories left inside them. I called it the Burden Becomes Light Foundation. And I smiled. Because I knew exactly who I had become. Winter in Paris comes like a hush. Gone are the street musicians and laughing tourists. In their place, candlelit windows, steaming cups of chocolate chaude, and the slow rhythm of footsteps echoing on old cobblestones. I loved the quiet, the stillness, the way the cold made everything feel sacred. I had turned 77. Simone and I celebrated by drinking a bottle of red wine far too expensive for women with our pensions and reading poetry aloud in our pajamas. We laughed until we cried, then cried until we laughed again. There was a joy in aging together that no one tells you about. the sheer defiance of still being alive when the world expects you to fade. A few weeks later, I received a letter from a woman named Grace Parker. She was 52, divorced, and had just enrolled in community college after 2 decades of raising her children and managing a laundromat. She had been awarded the First Burden Becomes Light scholarship. Her letter was full of trembling gratitude. But what moved me most was the final paragraph. I thought my story was over. I thought I had missed my chance. But your gift told me otherwise. It whispered, "There's still time." I read her words aloud to Simone. She nodded, eyes shining. Then it worked. You turned pain into permission. That spring, I returned to the States one last time, not for illness, not for compromise, but for legacy. David had asked me to come speak at the scholarship's official launch in Portland. It would be small, just a few students, some faculty, and donors. But he wanted me there. "You're the reason," he said over the phone. "They need to see your face, not just your name on the flyer." When I arrived at the airport, David was waiting at the gate with a bouquet of sunflowers. He hugged me longer than ever before, and when we pulled apart, I noticed something new in his eyes. Pride without control. Love without guilt. Elise joined us for dinner that night. She handed me a bound boucleta preliminary draft of her memoir. "I started writing after reading your short story," she said. "I thought, if she can tell the truth without apology, maybe I can too." I flipped through the pages. She had written about her mother's bitterness, about postpartum depression, about resentment and grace and regret. I saw her for the first time not as my daughter-in-law, but as a woman. And I loved her, not because she had changed, but because she was trying. The day of the launch, I stood behind a wooden podium in a modest college auditorium. My knees shook. My voice cracked, but I spoke clearly. I told them about the word burden, how it had followed me like a shadow, how it had once defined me, how it nearly convinced me to disappear. "But we are not burdens," I said. "We are bridges. Between what was and what could be. Between silence and truth." There was no applause at first. Only stillness. Then someone stood. Then another. Until the room filled with the soft sound of hands clapping, slow, respectful, deeply human. Afterward, a young woman in her 40s approached me, tears on her cheeks. "You made me want to start over," she whispered. I took her hands. "Then start. The rest will follow." I returned to Paris a week later. Simone was waiting with soup and sarcasm. "So," she teased, "how does it feel to be a symbol?" "Exhausting," I laughed, "but worth it." That night, we watched the city lights from the balcony, our blankets around our knees, our glasses full of wine neither of us could pronounce. Simone grew quieter in the weeks that followed. Her cough lingered. Her hands trembled. One evening, she simply said, "It's coming." I knew what she meant. She didn't want hospitals. She didn't want doctors poking her with tubes. She just wanted me to sit beside her and read Neruda and brush her hair and remind her, softly, that she had mattered. So I did. She passed one early morning in June, the window open, the smell of bread drifting from the bakery below. I buried her ashes beneath the cherry tree in her courtyard, the one that never bloomed quite right, but tried anyway. After Simone's passing, I stayed in Paris. Not because I was afraid to go elsewhere, but because, somehow, that little apartment by the Seine had become something sacred, a map of my second life. A place where reinvention wasn't just possible, it was expected. I filled my days with writing, teaching a local English class, and walking the same streets that had once welcomed me as a stranger. They now felt like old friends. And David? He called every Sunday. Sometimes he'd put the twins on. Lucy had taken up painting. Sam played guitar. They no longer asked when I was coming home. They understood. I was home. One cold November morning, I walked to the post office and mailed 3 letters. One to Grace Parker, congratulating her on her graduation. One to Elise, with edits on her latest memoir chapter. And one to David. Inside his envelope was a copy of my newest story, titled The House That Let Her Go. It was about a woman who had once been told she was too old, too fragile, too late, and how she became the architect of her own salvation. I don't know how much time I have left. I don't count days anymore. I count moments. The stillness of dawn, the clatter of market stalls, the laughter of 2 teenagers sharing headphones on the metro, the tug in my chest when a story finishes just right. I am not afraid, because I lived, not just existed, not just survived, lived. And that, more than any house or title or legacy, is enough.